Folks, welcome back to Ndaba Africa. This is Chris once again. Hello, folks, and welcome back once again to Chris Wyatt Africa for this special feature today on Sunday, November 14th, with none other than Phil Craig from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. I butchered that. Sorry, I just had a stream. I'm a little tired. The Cape Independence Advocacy Group. Phil was my first guest last year talking about the topic of Cape secession, and now that the 2021 municipal elections are done and dusted, except they're not done and dusted, but now that they are formally occurred, I should say, not over, on the 1st of November, or was that the 2nd of November, whatever it was, that Monday. Now that that's happened, there's a lot to unpack here about what's actually happened in this election and what's going on, especially as it relates to Cape Independence or Cape secession. And so I've asked Phil to come back on the program and talk to me. It's good to see you again, Phil. How you doing out there?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chris. It's fantastic to be back with you.
Do you know that last year the flying monkeys in the Twitter sphere, after you were on my program, went and attacked me personally? They took the first minute of my broadcast in which I introduced you and read your biography last year. They loaded up on Twitter and accused me of being a fake South African, a fraud from England who was pretending to be a South African and advocating racist ideology. And I'm like, excuse me? First off, you got the wrong guy and you got the wrong story too. So I wrote to them and admonished them. I said, if you're going to steal my content, which is copyright theft, at least get the story straight. This is Chris Wyatt giving the biography of my guest. I'm not my guest. Anyway, so that actually, they took it down. I was shocked. It's rare that someone on the left does that, but they took it down. So the Twitter sphere accused me of being Phil Craig. So there you go. So I've been mistaken for you in the past.
Don't worry. I get accused of all sorts of things. Most recently, I was having a radio debate with the EFF, and given my British heritage, I was accused of being a secret agent for the Queen, and I don't know what else. So you just have to laugh.
Does that MI6 supplement come in helpful for your paying your mortgage?
Yeah, if only.
If only, exactly. Yeah, no, speaking of the EFF, well, let's just start with those clowns. So Juju, once again, out spewing racial hatred again today. Of course, there'll be no consequences, even though what he says is on the margins of violating existing South African law. Talking about the DA and the Freedom Front Plus coalition would mean that Afrikanerdom would be coming back, a white minority rule. I'm sorry, wasn't the Freedom Front Plus in a coalition with the DA in Tshwane in the last government? They were already in an informal coalition. And did we get white minority rule? No. Did we get Afrikanerdom? No. This guy's a race hustler. I mean, you don't have to make any comments about him because you're South African. You got laws there, but I mean, it's despicable. Meanwhile, his bribery goes unnoticed. No charges filed against bribing the Aba Tembu King, Dalinenda Yebo, who is a criminal, of course, himself. But he says, hey, what are people upset about? Patrice Motsepe gave me a vehicle, and so did Nelson Mandela. They didn't bribe me. But after he got the vehicle, he's like, I urge the Aba Tembu people to vote for the EFF now that I've gotten a Mercedes. Anyway, thoughts, comments?
Oh, well, listen, I don't think that any laws are. I think most South Africans, of all races, recognise that Julius Malema is a race hustler and something of a cretin. So I don't think I'll get in too much hot water saying that. At the end of the day, we have to deal with all sorts of people. But I mean, he certainly isn't somebody who garners tremendous respect, and I certainly have very little respect for him. So
also on my part, Phil, I'd have to admit that it wasn't exactly a breaking news story.
Yeah.
Well, let's unpack things now. You're concerned mostly about the Cape, so let's talk about that. I covered this election breathtakingly. I don't know if you saw any of my coverage. It was wall to wall for a good 6 weeks. Candidates from 8 different parties, including Jack Miller from the Cape Independence Party, the leader of that party, and the leader of the IFP, Rabisa, and many others, as well as ward candidates across the country. And as the election results came in, I was incredibly disappointed that the abysmal, ridiculously low turnout. But as I predicted since June of last year, low turnout favors small parties because you need fewer voters to make an impact. And we've seen that. But one party in particular has really done well. People are crowing about the Inkatha Freedom Party, and they have a right to, because the Inkatha Freedom Party will make a major difference in KwaZulu-Natal. There'll be a kingmaker in several municipalities that they don't control and probably take control of them as a consequence. But they only gained 8,000 voters over what they had. So I really respect Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi when he said that those who have historically voted for our party stuck by our standard. And that was a truthful statement. And that was lost in all the cacophony. Look at the IFP, they did really well. They gained 1%. The EFF gained over 200 counselors, but they lost 24,000 votes. So they didn't go anywhere. They went backwards. And the reason they gained seats is because the ANC lost 2.5 million voters and the DA lost 1.5 million. So 4 million votes disappear from those two parties. So the EFF didn't do better as far as getting people to vote. The IFP didn't do better as far as getting people to vote. But one party that did was the Freedom Front Plus. They went from 115,000 votes to 276,000. Now, I know from my audience, pay attention, audience, please stop telling me they got 500,000. They didn't get 500,000 votes. They got 276,000 votes in ward councillor, and then they got proportional representation. You can't count a person as voting twice. I'm sorry, I don't accept that. But the Freedom Front Plus really did an amazing job here, Phil, and it's across the country. It wasn't just in one spot.
Yeah, look. So look, it's an interesting way that you analyse it, and it's good to have that insight. Obviously, I come to this thing from a very specific perspective, and I think low turnout is a symptom of the political malaise of South Africa, and therefore, it's not necessarily how I look at it. But I think what was really interesting, and you've picked up, and I think for what do we take away from this election? I think what touches on the Freedom Front, the IFP, and so on is actually there's this balance between centralist parties, in other words, those that want to centralise control, and obviously the ANC are very much in that mould, and then the EFF, who effectively are still part of the ANC to all intents and purposes. So that's the axis of what we always describe them as the racial socialists. They want to govern from the centre. The talked about, Malema was calling for the abolition of provinces and all sorts of stuff. They don't want to devolve power in any way, shape, or form. And on the other side of the equation, you've got the parties who want to devolve power, who want to give more power, get power closer to the people. And of course, the Freedom Front and the IFP would be absolutely at the vanguard of both of those are parties that have specific mandates or specific constituencies, and they're looking to represent. And I think what we're seeing is the beginnings of the breakup of South Africa, which for us is great. And if we looked in terms of that balance, 65% of voters in the Western Cape voted for decentralising parties, whether it was the big parties or this whole proliferation of smaller parties, community parties, and so on. And across the rest of South Africa, about 35% now voted for decentralising parties. So that was very significant. And then, of course, the ideological divide between the Western Cape and the rest of South Africa is just an ever-present. The political analysts do their best to ignore, but we look and we always put the ANC and the EFF together, and we also try and break away 8 provinces and compare them to the 9th, and what we saw is in 8 provinces, 61.2% of voters either voted ANC or EFF, and in the Western Cape it was 23.2 or 23 point something. The ANC was 20.4. So you see the colossal difference between the ideology of the Western Cape and the rest of South Africa, and we see across South Africa this breakup and people wanting to devolve power. When it comes to the Freedom Front, I have very little dealings with the IFP because they're not really in the Western Cape. Although clearly there would be some synergy in terms of ideology of devolution. But when it comes to the Freedom Front, I didn't do the final analysis, but about 3/4 of the way through the counting. Obviously what happened was that the Freedom Front came out for Cape independence and were very vocal on Cape independence, and of course people were trying to say that the Freedom Front, it's got nothing to do with their successes in the Western Cape, have got nothing to do with Cape independence, and actually they're doing well in the rest of the country. And whilst that was true to an extent, I did a quick analysis and a fair way through the voting. I think in the last election something like 11.5% of Freedom Front votes were cast in the Western Cape, and at the time that I did the analysis in this election, there were well over 18%, nearly 19% were now in the Western Cape. So whilst the Freedom Front did do well across the country, it did especially well in the Western Cape where they've got behind Cape independence. And I think they've shown the DA something significant, which is people said you can't be a national party and support Cape independence and prosper. And yet here we have the Freedom Front, who are a national party who supported Cape independence, did really well in the Western Cape, but did really well outside of the Western Cape too, when they're supporting Cape independence, because actually I think this thing is people want to see their ideology prosper, and I think particularly people who aren't racial socialists and want to see this kind of free market and non-racial society where people are genuinely treated as equals. People want to see that flourish, so what you've started to see is that people outside of the Western Cape think, well, great, an independent Western Cape is really going to help me. Perhaps I'll live there, perhaps I won't. But even if I don't, I'm going to have a fantastic ally next door, and I'm going to have an ideological homeland that I can go to if I need to.
No, it's a great point. It's interesting to see that your analysis, my analysis, the coffee table analysis right there that we're just talking about, that I would agree that I would say that both of our analysis are spot on from perspectives we're coming at it. You're obviously focused on something very specific, and I don't dispute anything you say right there. And my numbers, I think, are very much accurate and say something very strong about what's happening. It is interesting here, the point that you make, which very few people are looking at, is that a 2/3 majority in the Western Cape plus are against the centralization and for the federalist sort of system. Whereas in the rest of the country, it seems to be the opposite of that, at least, if not worse. And in some provinces like in Mpumalanga and Limpopo and Eastern Cape, it's even worse. It's wholesale. But what's I think is also interesting in this election, too, and a little bit away from the Cape for a moment, is that in Gauteng, the economic heartblood of South Africa, the population center, the economic center, the ANC got slaughtered. I mean, they got like 35% of the province. So now, even if we throw in the militant armed wing of the ANC, also known as the Economic Freedom Fighters, we throw them in, that's another 10%. So even with that, that's still 45%. That's abysmal for a party that claims a mantle of liberation. Of course, that's fiction, too. They are not the party that liberated South Africa, but they like to claim that. But they got slaughtered there. And they absolutely got... Now, this one wasn't hard to predict. Now I did predict it in June, and I picked in July. Well, I picked it long before that, early this year. I predicted the ANC was going to lose 50% in Durban, eThekwini, and that they were going to come under 50% in KwaZulu-Natal. Now, once the armed insurrection against the ANC's the internal civil war they had occurred, I was like, this is easy. Now my prediction is definitely going to come true. So I don't know what role that played, but I'm sure it played a role. But the rest of the country, they're nonplussed by this. I'm shocked. Maybe the Western Cape's a little different, but the Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, Northwest, I'm just shocked that people didn't look at this and go, oh my gosh, look what happened there. That could have happened here. The government did nothing, or they were involved in it. We don't know. And it's just people are nonplussed. Unless it happens to them, it doesn't affect them. Clearly, the riots and the looting that took place in KZN had a direct impact on voting results against the ANC, either in their voters not showing up or people simply, I don't know, people voting for other parties. It's crazy. But I don't know. What is the reason South Africans are so apathetic? I know you can't answer it. I can't answer it. If I could, I'd have the secret recipe and I'd be hailed as the best analyst in the world. But I mean, any thoughts? Are people just worn down by the Rona hysteria? Are they worn down by 27 years of malfeasance? Or are they just, I don't know.
No, look, I think I would turn that around into something of a positive. Yeah, for me, for someone who was born and raised in Europe and came to South Africa as an adult, I kind of have the perspective of the first world, the traditional first world, and then coming into South Africa where you've kind of got this real mixture. You've got some very first world parts of South Africa, some very third world parts, and you have this mix. But the one really, really noticeable difference, and I always describe it as the frontier mentality, and I love it. I absolutely love it. There's a part of me that's a real maverick, and to in South Africa, people just don't expect other people to do things for them. So actually, what you're seeing is people just disengaging with the government because the government to them are totally irrelevant. The government is almost people who the government has no authority over me. It's just this organisation, this pack of leeches, and all right, they trot on, and isn't it disgusting? But actually, you know what? I'm going to look after myself. And for most of that, people don't understand. Even if you're relatively wealthy in South Africa, you provide everything for yourself. It's not like a Western society that people outside of South Africa would live in. We even if we don't send our kids to private schools, we send them to these sort of quasi-private schools. So I mean, if I look at my own family, I pay for my own medical. We pay taxes. We all try and pay as little as we possibly can. Then the government takes money for healthcare, but you would never dream of going to the government hospital, so you pay for your own healthcare. The government provides government schools, but you wouldn't dream of going to one of those, so you pay towards a quasi-government school where you look after that for yourself. You don't rely on the police. The police are totally useless and are never going to turn up. So you either arm yourself or you hire an armed security company to look after you. And you rally around as communities and protect yourself. So actually, the government is just something we laugh at, and I think that's what you've got is where in the rest of the world people are saying the government must save us. You still see that among some of the communities. Amongst the sort of middle classes, we don't expect the government to save us. We despise the government. We have no respect for them. They're just something that exists for their own purpose, and they aren't part of the South African psyche. So I think it's a positive thing, and I think that's what we'll start to see. And actually, as the world, I mean, your own country is starting to sort of head down that same route. And as we see South Africa break up, we don't know how it's going to break up, but we're going to see it break up, and we're seeing people and one of the things with the riots was the riots. What do you see from the riots? Do you see the breakdown of constitutional order? Do you break down law and order? Of course, those things happen, but you just see these wonderful stories of communities defending, coming together across racial bounds, often across economic boundaries, protecting their shopping centres, protecting their people, roaming their streets, barricading and actually what you've seen across the length and breadth of the country is people making the government irrelevant. And I think that's what you see in South Africa, and that's and it's just a government that eventually is becoming a puppet government, and therefore people don't really care.
Well, that's a fair point. But you forgot one key point there: people producing their own electricity because you can't rely on a state parastatal. Yeah, that's the other piece of this. So I tell people all the time. I say, listen, one of the reasons why South Africa is not an attractive foreign direct investment destination is because the workforce is notoriously inefficient. You've got all sorts of challenges. You've got varying levels of productivity across the workforce, and some working very much against you. I've talked to someone recently, that they had to hire high school teachers to come in and teach university graduates who were, of course, put in there with 30 and 40% of their matric entrance scores, and they run around going, "Roads must fall," and that idiocy, and fees must fall. And then they're chartered accountants, and they can't do basic arithmetic. They're graduates of university, So you that's one problem there. Plus, you've got to provide your own security. You've got to hire your own security. We've got to provide your own electricity. The list goes on and on. South Africa is notoriously uncompetitive when it comes to FDI, and Ramaphosa running around trying to drum up FDI when he's talking about expropriating property. It really doesn't send a strong message that you want my money, because it's not coming there. But no, I get your point you're saying, but I think the government has made itself irrelevant. That's the bottom line here. You say citizens being irrelevant, but. Okay, so that's a fair argument that people switch off, but there's a danger with that. I mean, as long as there's a legal, not moral, but legal authority over people, this government could still go down a road that really makes it impossible to survive. I mean, if in fact these idiots team up with the economic freedom fighters, which I don't think is going to happen, and cow to their demand to pass this legislation for expropriation without compensation, which, by the way, is in the front of the parliament. People are like, it's over. It's not over. It's in front of parliament, and it's about property. And if they pass that legislation at the national level, then, next time Phil says something, they'll just take his bank account, and they don't have to justify it. It's legal. It's not moral, but it's legal. No, I mean, I'm being a little sarcastic, but I mean, there's so many things that are just a real problem here. I mean, citizens can defend their communities, and we saw that especially in Phoenix and in all over KwaZulu-Natal. And actually, if for people who watch my coverage, remember I warned people when they attacked the Mui River Plaza. And people said, "What's next?" I said, "Watch them start." People start looting stores, and they did. And then a day or two after that, people got concerned. I said, "Yeah, you should be concerned, because the police aren't going to defend your neighborhoods. You're going to have to get people in your neighborhood to defend it. You're going to have to get hoses and pumps, and have the hoses next to your swimming pools to put out the fires when people throw Molotov cocktails at your houses. You need to defend your homes. You need to have exit plans. You need to have people with first aid kits. Yada yada yada." Anyway, but the point is that people can do that, but that's not living. That's surviving, and people want to live and thrive. And the only answer is to get rid of these ghouls. And I'd hoped, my disappointment for me is this was an opportunity to get rid of them. And the ANC still controls 122 cities across South Africa. A lot of that's to be expected, but I would have hoped that the DA would have done better. And while the Freedom Front Plus did very well, they're coming from very low base from 2015. And they're going to be a kingmaker. They have 221 seats now instead of 67. That's going to be a huge impact. But we still see the ANC in a strong position all over the country. And as you said, a lot of people think the government's irrelevant, but I mean, I don't know if that's entirely true. It's the government that now look, don't infer incorrectly from this, Phil. I'm a small government guy. I laugh when people talk about the government picking up my rubbish. I pay a company to pick up my rubbish. When people talk about providing my electricity, I pay a private company for my electricity. The only thing I get from the city is law enforcement, and I've seen a patrol car come through my neighborhood once in 5 years. Once in 5 years. The only other time was when someone called the cops on me. They said that there was an alarm going off in my house, and I walked, and the cop knocked on the door, and I'm like, "What's going on here?" He goes, "Someone said there's an alarm here." I'm like, "My car's not ringing. What alarm are you talking about?" And there's a little device we put in the ground there to scare off the voles because it makes a little sound. It buzzes. That was the only noise. And so someone called the cops on that. Anyway, so I mean, I saw a cop twice in my neighborhood in 5 years. But the only thing the city does for me is provide water. And they've doubled my bill because they're making me pay for a new plant instead of borrowing money. So I'm a small government guy. But I mean, in South Africa, until that stuff is privatized, that's what people see from the government. And no one's picking up the trash.
Sure, and look, and now you're making all of the arguments for why the Cape Independence Advocacy Group exists, and why Cape Independence exists. So we of course we're aware of that, and actually we know we need government. It's not that we don't need a government. I'm just taking the positive. I think one of the things talk about investment. I think in terms of along classic lines, South Africa is a terrible place to invest in, but its people are truly special, and that's one of the things that people shouldn't. There's something really, really special. Somebody who wasn't born in South Africa and came here in my 30s, there's something very, very special about South African people, and they are capable of really immense things. So South Africa has a positive future. The Western Cape has a really positive future. What we've got to work out is how do we get from here, because we've currently got a government that's totally useless and is intent on self-destruction, and how do we carve out a better future children, generations that come after, and that is essentially how we get to Cape independence. In the Western Cape, the majority of Western Cape never voted ANC. We voted against this government. They've never had a majority. They've currently got 20.4% of the vote in the Western Cape, but they're making all of the trying to change. We have the government that we elect, and in the Western Cape, we can't control who Limpopo choose, nor do we want to. We can't control who Mpumalanga elect. That's their choice, and they must live with the consequences of their decisions. But actually, what we're not willing to continue to do is to keep living with it, with us living with the consequences of their decisions. When for 30 years we've made different and better decisions, and we want to have the government that we want. We want to elect our own government. And we want to set about saving the part of the country where we live in, and hopefully that will spill over into the rest of South Africa. Hopefully that'll be a positive force for change. But that's beyond our sphere of influence. What is in our sphere of influence is the Western Cape, and we have to start making changes. And what's really positive, and I think what's going to be one of the things that's going to be an earmark of 2022, I think it's going to be a big year, and people perhaps don't know what's coming because so much is happening behind the scenes. But we now have really, outside of the ANC, the EFF, amongst the rest of the political parties in the Western Cape, is a real mandate for change, and radical change. Not necessarily for Cape independence, although we'll keep pushing for Cape independence, and that's where we think it'll end up. But actually for taking control away. So the DA are leading that. The Freedom Front are very much behind that. We've seen these new parties. You have the Cape Coloured Congress, and we have the ACDP who feel the same way. So we've got all of these parties who want to take power away from Pretoria and vest it in the Western Cape, in Cape Town, for the people of the Western Cape. And we may at this point differ over what we want to do with those powers, but actually what you're going to see us is taking hands and say, look, it's our choice. We can't keep electing a government. And then actually you say no. And the key thing for me is democracy only works when the losers accept the result. Democracy is based on the defeat, and the Western Cape has for 30 years accepted defeat, accepted that the government we didn't elect is the national government, and that's fine. But those days are coming to an end. The Western Cape has had enough of that. That government has got worse and worse and worse. It's lost all legitimacy. It's got electoral legitimacy, but it's got no moral legitimacy. And now we're seeing the provincial government saying, well, we want to control our own police force, and we want to run our own transport network, and we want to start running our own ports, and we want to start generating our own electricity. And then we've got us as the independence movement saying, well, actually, we want to go beyond that. We want to close the border, and we want to sever ties formally. But actually, we're going to work together on things, because what we're all saying, and actually, interestingly enough, we had some formal correspondence with the ANC in the run-up to the election, and they say that the people of the Western Cape have no democratic will. Which is a truly offensive thing to say, and that is going to be the basis for the fight. They say the South Africa has a democratic will, and the people of the Western Cape have no democratic will outside of what is vested in South Africa, and that is going to be an ideological battle that's going to play out in 2022. It's going to play out over the police. It's going to play out over transport. We've got this referendum legislation before Parliament, and what the South African Constitution does allow, it allows two things. It allows provincial premiers to call referendums, and it allows self-determination. And those two things now need to be brought to the fore, and the Western Cape is going to fight to make decisions for itself in the form of referendums, and the legislation is ready before Parliament, and the provincial government is 100% behind that. They may not yet be behind Cape independence, but they are 100% behind passing the DA bill before Parliament. It's before Parliament as we speak, and they are behind calling referendums in the Western Cape to take power away from Pretoria and invest it in, and the Constitution allows for that. Now, and one of the fights is obviously the Constitution, that to change the Constitution, to change some of those provisions, requires 2/3 support in the National Assembly, and you're going to see the ANC saying, well, whoa, hang on a second, it doesn't matter what you want, we're not going to pass it in Parliament. And I think that's going to create, because that's not the basis of the Constitution. The Constitution actually gives choice to the people of the Western Cape, it has provision for referendums, and it gives the right to self-determination. It was never intended that actually once the Western Cape decides what it does, up and deny democratic will, and that's a fight that has to be had. I don't mean a physical fight, but that's a fight that has to be had, and that's going to be a fight that's going to be had between all of the parties in the Western Cape, and that is the start of something massive in South Africa, and this election is probably the watershed moment for that.
Well, I need to clarify something here very quickly. Cedric Stevens said, is Cape Independence going to delist as a political party? We need to be clear about something. The Cape Independence Advocacy Group, which is who I'm speaking to today, is not the Cape Independence Party, or as they were on the ballot, the Cape Exit Party. Separate organizations. That's led by Jack Miller, and they got all of 7,200 votes nationwide, all in the Western Cape. So that party is not this group. This is an advocacy group that's separate from that. So we need to make sure that's clear. And I don't know if Cedric is confused, or maybe he just didn't finish typing the rest of that statement. But anyway, so they're two separate things. Let's make that clear right up front. It's important. Now, you talked a little bit ago, Phil, about all these different groups, new parties springing up, that sort of thing. Interestingly, the first coalition in the 66 hung municipalities is in Cedarburg in the Western Cape, where the Democratic Alliance, I think, astutely has taken a backseat when it comes to power in the city, because they didn't come in first, but they helped work a coalition with a new organization, the Cedarburg Residents Association, and that's led by a gentleman who was the former deputy director of the Scorpions, which was, while I didn't agree with the formation of the Scorpions, I can't argue with their success. They were an amazing organization before the Chicken Hawks were created, after they were disbanded. So he will now be the mayor of Cedarburg, and the deputy mayor will be astutely a Freedom Front Plus member. Very smart. The DA will, because they need to show a little humility here, I think. Although the Freedom Front Plus wasn't the third largest party, the ANC came in first, then the Cedarburg residents, then the DA around 20%. But they got 6 seats on 11-seat council, and we got one down, 65 to go before any revotes are necessary with these councils. So I think that's pretty clever. But I think that goes in line with what you're talking about. People are hot full of the nonsense, and they're not looking to this government to solve their problems. So those who did voted in a different direction, and certainly in Cedarburg. The ANC still got 35%, but that's not much. And by the way, the ANC refused to show up for the council meeting, so they couldn't form the council. Petulant children is what they are. They're just little children, just like they did the same thing or something similar over there at Umgeni in KwaZulu-Natal when Chris Pappas tried to sit down with the DA councilors. A suspended executive was there, and she's illegally at the meeting, so the DA got up and walked out. So it looks like the ANC is not going to play nice. They're going to be difficult in the places they've lost. But Cedarburg, I think, is an interesting, case study, but certainly a possibility what might be happening in the rest of the Western Cape. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, so it is, and I think Cedar looks so interesting enough, and it ties in with a comment from the listener. I'm sorry, I didn't remember his name. But we're an advocacy group, and we work with virtually all of the political parties, and we very specifically are not aligned to any one political party, because the solution is actually for all of the people of the Western Cape, and what we're agreeing on is the right to choose for ourselves. But we're going to have different choices, and actually even people in our own organisation vote for different parties, and perhaps when we get to independence, we may end up between political opponents, but actually at least we'll make our own choices. Cedarburg is a great example, because Cedarburg is an example, for example, where the Freedom Front have done very, very well together with Cedarburg Easter. So you've seen the Residents Association, a local party, devolution, local issues. You've got the Freedom Front, and actually, one of the great leverages for the independence movement is that the DA have to work with the independence movement for fear of alienating them and bringing themselves under 50% in the Western Cape. And the one of the interesting things is the most Cape independence supporters vote DA. That we know that statistically, we've polled it twice. About 70% of all independent supporters vote for the DA, which is fairly logical. But they're quite vulnerable to. And even more to these elections. I think the DA came in at 54%, in 54.5% or something, and parties that actually have secession in their manifestos or their constitutions collected 5.4% of the vote this time. So they're already almost there. And I spoke to Dr. Mulder from the Freedom Front, who's an outright secessionist and does a lot of work with us. He said, look, somewhere between 6 and 10 municipalities, they will be involved in the coalition, and they've been very vocal that one of the things that they want to push in coalitions is Cape independence. So it's great for us. It's more and more leverage on the DA to bring them closer and closer to Cape independence. And actually, the DA is more or less there anyway. They don't support Cape independence. They do referendums, and they agreed in the run up to this election that they would, they would support a referendum on Cape independence. So we're not very far apart, and we know that the majority actually of DA supporters in the Western Cape support Cape independence. So all of these things fit together, and the successes of these small organisations and the Freedom Front, who of all of the secessionist parties, the most successful was the Freedom Front, closely followed by the Cape Coloured Congress, I must say. Look, it's excellent. For us, it's that we're going to be going into a new era of government where Cape independence is represented across the Western Cape formally in councils, and that's going to be fantastic.
No, it's a very interesting point you make there. Not a standpoint, a point that you make. I was looking at the numbers while you were saying that, and the number of councillors that are there, in the Western. I just lost my map. There it is. Yeah, the Freedom Front Plus got 34 seats in the Western Cape. And the Cape Coloured Congress, which didn't exist previously, but got 28,000 actual votes plus, got 8 seats. So that's 42 seats right there on those two parties that both are clearly in favor of Cape secession. The DA has 404. So you throw those together, that's 450 seats in the Western Cape as a whole. Now, it really doesn't matter. I mean, that's the thing is the DA keeps getting wrapped around the axle. They're all proud of the fact that the ANC is below 50%. And I keep telling people, I've been telling people since I started covering this stuff in June of last year, that the national total doesn't matter. It's what happens at ward level. It's what happens in municipalities. You have to capture municipalities to make a change and improve things. And that's where you see a change here. The Cape Coloured Congress did surprisingly well. I didn't expect them to do that well. I thought that most people would be like, who are they? CCC? Civilian Conservation Corps? Who are these guys? Never heard of them. But I did expect to see the Freedom Front Plus do very well, but they exceeded my expectations on the national level. Now, there's one monkey wrench here, and that's Patricia DeLille's, personality party called Good. They say they're not going to sit in any coalitions, and I don't know why they exist other than to self-aggrandizement of Patricia DeLille, but they got 39 seats. That's 39 seats that could have been used, I think, much more usefully elsewhere. Yeah, look,
informed. It's difficult, absolute choices, but I mean, from our point of view, we're a long group. So we work on a party. So you kind of, what would have been the perfect scenario for us going into these elections? The DA agreed with the independence movement. We agreed that it wasn't, and certainly with us, we did independence in elections. And we agreed. The DA agreed to call the referendum legislation, and they agreed to a question on Cape independence that was going to be held once it's all sorted. And that was that's a fantastic. So now we're in this scenario where we come into this post-election era. They are for a referendum. They've got the provincial. We're looking to co-opt them towards Cape independence and bring them ever closer. What we've seen is, in terms of, we always want pressure points, obviously, so we want to have some growth and some independence parties that keep them honest, and the Freedom Front are obviously very strong for that, and the Cape Coloured Congress have too. And one of the interesting things is, and one of the interesting dynamics in the Western Cape is the collapse of the coloured vote for the perhaps about the DA.
Phil, you're breaking up quite a bit now.
The DA.
You're breaking up.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Are you able to switch over to the other connection or no?
Yeah, let me try it now. Hang on.
Okay.
Let's just have a look and see.
It was okay for a bit, but now we're missing too many syllables.
Just going to see if this one comes on now. Right, I should be on the new connection now. Is that any better?
At the moment, it's better. Yeah. You started to say, I think you were saying that what's interesting is the collapse of colored support for the DA in the Western Cape. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, Davy Schultz did this election analysis, and he was saying that, look, in 2016, about 75% of coloured voters voted for the DA, and nationally that would be. In 2019, that had dropped to about 63%, and it's dropped into mid-50s in 2019. So we're seeing a real strong, and I think that's logical, and I think that's a big wake-up call for the DA in the Western Cape, who are predominantly a coloured party in the Western Cape. The DA have got 55% of the vote. The white population is somewhere between 13 and 16%. They've got some black support, but the majority of their support in the Western Cape come from the coloured community. So they simply cannot afford to lose those votes. And I think the reason they are losing, or one of the reasons they're losing coloured votes, is that by implementing the national policies of the ANC in the Western Cape, they're disadvantaging coloured people to a significant extent. And I think coloured people have largely lost patience and are looking for other solutions. And that's why we're starting to see the Patriotic Alliance did very well, the Cape Coloured Congress did well, ICOSA, some of the Khoisan groups. Actually, we put together all of these coloured parties. They really, that was probably the most remarkable bit. And because it's divided across a number of organisations, it's not so easy to pick up on, but it's significant. It's really significant. And actually, if you want to know what do I think that the DA are most fearful over right now in the Western Cape, it's the loss of the coloured vote. Because actually, if they don't stem those losses, they will lose the Western Cape, and they'll be and that's probably very significant.
Well, it's interesting because I've repeatedly told people, because, you get these coffee table analysts or just, bigots and racists don't know anything about what they're talking about. Oh, it's a party of the whites, party of the whites. Well, I mean, that doesn't explain the DA's surge to 26% of the national vote when it's a party of the whites. Whites make up 8% of the population, so you can obviously not. So the majority of voters historically for this party, since Helen Zille surged it way after taking over from Tony Leon, has been colored voters. And you can see the implosion. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. I mean, they had 4,004,000 votes in 2016. In 2021, they have 2.5 million. They lost 1.5 million of their voters. That's insane. I mean, the DA lost 37% of the people who voted for it in 2016 in this municipal election. That's huge. And you can see, obviously, some of it as voters that stayed away. Other parts of it are people who turned to the Good Party, to the Cape Coloured Congress, to the Freedom Front Plus, to all these other groups. You mentioned the Patriotic Alliance. Everybody's making fun of the guy who runs the party because he's a convicted felon. But here's the thing. They're kingmakers in a couple places like Beaufort West. And potentially also, if people want them, they can be a kingmaker in Joburg or certainly in Tshwane. They've really done well in those places as well. They're not just in the Western Cape. That's where they did the best, but they also did well in Gauteng and parts of Gauteng. So it's the DA is they're arrogant. That's honestly, I mean, listen, Phil, do you know how hard it was to get a DA candidate on my channel? I got 8 parties to come on my channel. The ANC never responded. The EFF I wouldn't invite. but all the other parties I invited came on, and I did get someone from the DA, but that was only Refuwe Ncheke, who is the mayoral candidate in Ekurhuleni. That woman is brilliant. She's amazing. She came on my channel twice, but I actually know people who are ward counselors, and I'm not talking about Ronaldo Jose. I know people who are ward counselors in South Africa for the DA who are business contacts of mine, and they promised to come on the channel and then fob me off. It's like there was a freeze. Only John Steenhuisen can be seen in this campaign, and it's they don't want to listen to advice, and they've been pummeled. They can put lipstick on this pig, and they can walk through rose-colored gardens, and they can whistle past the cemetery all day long, and whatever else I come up with, to try to compare it. But the reality is that they need a wake-up call, and they're losing the colored vote, if such a thing exists. But they're not only losing that, they're losing a lot of South Africans who are frustrated, particularly in the Western Cape, because they don't take a stance on secession. Now, I've told my audience that that's a difficult position for them when they're trying to be a national party. But your point about the Freedom Front Plus being a national party and doing very well despite being in favor of Cape secession obviously didn't impact their status. So, the DA's run out of excuses.
Yeah, look, we expect. So we work quite closely with a lot of parties, and and obviously a lot of our focus goes on the DA because they're the party of national government, the provincial government. Yep. Sorry, and the only party that can call a referendum on Cape independence is the DA, and actually they're clearly the dominant political force in the Western Cape, and whatever they've done in this election, they remain that. And broadly speaking, we have a good relationship with the DA. Obviously, we don't agree on everything, and I think within that organisation. From my personal perspective, I do see a real desire to change. I do see that they are trying to address some of the issues, and I think that what we're going to see, and certainly one of our key goal as an organisation, the CIAG in 2020, is to build this political alliance around the right for the Western Cape to make decisions for itself, and that will be an alliance that we hope to involve the DA, the Freedom Front, the ACDP, the UIM, the Cape Coloured Congress, the Cape Independence Party, AfriForum, the Independence Movement, and actually academics. And I say that not glibly because I think broadly speaking, we've got the bones of that agreement together already. So what you're going to see is not and certainly as an organisation, we want to see people in the Western Cape taking pot shots at each other because that lets the national government off the hook. We want to put our differences aside and say, look, the Western Cape, it did not vote for the nonsense that's going on in South Africa, and we haven't voted for it for 30 years. And now we need to stand together and actually, via referendums, to allow us to make decisions in the Western Cape about what we want to do, and we need to start taking power back from Pretoria to the Western Cape, and we use referendums to do it. And once we want a question on Cape independence, and that's what we want, and perhaps the DA would rather have federalism, that's fine, and then we can compete about that when we get to the referendum. But until then, let's get the referendum legislation through Parliament, and let's get the Western Cape people behind this and standing up for themselves and because we want control of our police, we want control of our transport, all of these things. We know when we polled, 76% of Western Cape voters wanted more powers given to the provincial government, and that was across all racial groups. It's not so there's a real desire amongst the Western Cape people to have more, and that makes sense because the Western Cape is so much better governed than the rest of South Africa. Why would we outsource it to a party we didn't vote for and who are dishonest and incompetent?
No, absolutely. I agree with you. There's a couple of super chats I got to address here very quickly, if you don't mind. Just going to get to those. So Brett Sessoms gave a couple super chats, and one's a statement, one's a question. So Brett says, I don't support Cape secession, but I do support a mandate on it. So in other words, he calls for referendum. The Cape residents should choose. So he's in solidarity with your group there. Of course, Brett's in the States, so that doesn't really help you. But and then Brett says, if the Cape does secede, what will be the official language? What will be the language in Parliament? I would guess it would be English, and Afrikaans would have dual status.
Oh, well, and Xhosa. We'd have to have all three languages. Yeah, look, our movement is completely inclusive. It's based on the democratic will of the Western Cape people, and ironically, there are also some Khoi and San languages that are about to think. But I think, predominantly the languages that are in common usage the Western Cape are English and Afrikaans and Xhosa, and I would expect, I think if we're going to start on the right foot, then all three should retain official status. There's no point in starting the other, and I think what tends to happen in most countries, and certainly in the Western Cape, is it depends where you go to what language is spoken. I live out in the country where I live. Afrikaans is the default language. If you go into a shop and you pick something off the shelf and you go to the till, that you'll be greeted in Afrikaans. If you respond in English, the person will just switch to English. That's fine. If you go to a predominantly black area, you'll be greeted in Xhosa, and if you go to the cities or you're conducting business, you'll be greeted in English, and that's fine.
No, absolutely, and it's difficult, if not impossible, to include all these core languages. I mean, languages that are disappearing, unfortunately, like Nu, which was one I've highlighted. Just one last first language speaker of Nu left, and she's in her late 80s, trying to get people to learn language. It's going to be tough to save languages like that. But yeah, predominantly that's the three main languages that are spoken in the province. Kevin Morris keeps asking, this is an admin thing, keeps asking, he wants the poo emoji. Kevin, that's for members. If you're a paying member at Chris Wyatt Africa supporting independent journalism, you can get the poo emoji. So that costs you 19 Rand 95 per month, become a member of the crew team member level. That's it. And then you get the poo emoji and 15 other custom emojis. So they want to see. I don't know if you can see it, Phil, but on my shelf behind me there, I have Julius Malema. He's wearing his red beret.
Yeah, I should have recognized him.
I should have jumped right out at you there. Yeah. So anyway, but there's a poo emoji here, so people want to do it. So anyway, but you got to be a paying member for that. Yeah. No, it's so. All in all, my take from our conversation thus far is that you're encouraged by the vote. You're encouraged by citizens taking responsibility for their own communities because the government's not doing it. And you're encouraged by the surge in votes for pro-independence or pro-secession parties in the Western Cape.
Yeah, look, so we're working a plan, and we ended up exactly where we thought we were going to be. So what did I want before the elections? I wanted the DA to and maybe I'm speaking personally now, but and half and half for the organisation. The DA have agreed to bring the referendum legislation. Have agreed to call a referendum. So we need the DA to be there to do those things. But therefore we didn't want the support for the DA to collapse. We at the same time we want to keep the DA honest on the agreements they've made. So we wanted the DA to be under pressure from the independence movement, and that's absolutely happened. We anticipated that parties that supported or secessionist parties outright would land somewhere between 5 and 6% of the vote. They've ended up with 5.4% of the vote. So I mean, and actually the other thing we haven't spoken about is the big myth in South Africa. The DA themselves have applied this slightly nonsensical line that we don't, Cape independence would be a great idea, but we are a national party and we want to save South Africa. And look, the ANC is almost under 50%. It's like, well, okay, here we are. You've now got the ANC under 50%. There hasn't been some Damascus conversion. All of our problems are not resolved. And actually, we've had the ANC under 50% for 30 years and Western Cape, so that it's got nothing to do with us, and it isn't some miracle solution. And actually, the big question the DA have got to answer is they're saying, look, we're not going into a coalition with the ANC or the EFF. Well, then how on earth in 20... And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but then how on earth in 2024 is getting the ANC under 50% a solution? Because either you're going to coalition with one of those two parties, or they end up in coalition against you. So actually what you're saying is, don't worry, guys, we don't need Cape Independent in 2024. We'll deliver you an ANC, EFF national coalition. Well, I mean, so effectively, let's sum that up. The choice of people in the Western Cape is you've got two things before 2024: Cape Independence or an ANC EFF national coalition. Pick your choice, because that's actually what the DA are going to deliver you.
Wow. Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. I mean, the only way that fails is if the ANC drops to 25% and the EFF stays below the 15%, which I said is their maximum threshold national level. That would mean they get 40. But then you're going to have fractured parties, and you'd have to have some weird coalition in Parliament. So it's not a good outcome no matter what happens. That's why I was so adamant that this election was so critical for South Africa from a standpoint that if the ANC lost control of metros and opposition parties took control of them, in most cases, that would be the DA, let's just be honest, because of where they're positioned. But if opposition parties took control of them outright or in a coalition, preferably an outright, then they have between now and 2024 to show to people transparent governance, delivery of services, and honesty. When you find someone in your ranks that's criminal or corrupt, you investigate, you expose, you prosecute, you get rid of them. That's what they need to do. All the things ANC doesn't do. But now we've just got this mess that everyone's going to be talking about with all these hung coalitions, and that goal is not going to be achievable, I don't think. So maybe, now here's the thing. Maybe secession is the way to go for the Western Cape, but if the Western Cape is successful, it's secession. I predict that KwaZulu-Natal is not far behind. The IFP would be in favor of leaving the country themselves and having their own country. I wouldn't be shocked. And then if that happens, I wouldn't be surprised to see Khoi groups in the Northern Cape talking about their own country, although that's a less viable option. KwaZulu-Natal is viable as a country. Western Cape is viable as a country. That leaves the ANC only with Port Elizabeth as a port. So they're kind of stuck. They're kind of screwed when it comes to getting stuff into the country. But anyway, so yeah, I see where you're coming from. It's hard to argue against the logic about the DA's position. This isn't DA bashing, and you weren't bashing DA either. But I mean, if you look at this objectively, it's at some level, it's almost nonsensical, the argument they've been making. Also, the argument that they came out and said, don't vote for smaller parties. I don't think that helped their case at all in this election. That really turned a lot of people off. Let people make a choice for themselves who they think the right choice is. And we can see that in places like Cedarburg now. The DA didn't win the majority. They were the third largest party, but they're going to be in governance in a coalition that should work. I mean, sure. I don't know this mayor, but the fact that he was a deputy director of the Scorpions gives me hope, because I did trust the Scorpions as a responsible body under Leonard McCartney. And I think that Cedarburg has a good chance of being governed well now. We'll see.
Look, for what I know of Cedarburg, and I don't know the guy, but I know. Look, I have contacts who've said that look, the farming interests are particularly behind that party, and effectively it's farm workers and farm owners that have come together there, and they want to be pro business and pro an economy and pro jobs, which is exactly the language that we need to be hearing.
Well, that's excellent. Now, Beaufort West is one that's really got me scratching my head. I don't know what's going to happen there, because the Patriotic Alliance is looking pretty strong there, and the DA's just got obliterated there, so I don't know what's going to happen. But even in DA strongholds, like down around Hermanus and places like that, they took a bit of a nick there. They lost some votes that was, I think, in some respects, a bit surprising for the DA. I don't know if they took their eye off the ball, but we saw Helen Zille, the federal chair, go to Nelson Mandela Bay to try to win, and the DA did worse. They had 45% of the vote last time. Now they barely have 40%. Nelson Mandela Bay has lost. They could only possibly string a coalition together with 6 or 7 parties, and that's not going to happen. So unless there's a revote, they're going to be in the opposition to Nelson Mandela Bay. Crazy stuff.
Look, but interestingly enough, and my own feeling on the DA is that they actually have started to get back to their core values. They potentially have started to arrest the slide. So I think the DA have had an okay election. I think they were plummeting. If we look where they went from 2016 to 2019, and accepting that's provincial to national, they were in free fall, and they were all over the place. And actually, they stand for something now. And I think it's interesting, because a lot of the people that I know are DA voters who didn't vote DA, but didn't vote DA for tactical reasons. At the end of the day, because the DA has always been quite a safe party, and the time for safe politics is finished. We're now looking for more radical solutions, and I think the DA is coming under pressure, because in the Western Cape they've been the government for 3 state terms with an big outright majority, and actually if they can't deliver, people are going to start looking for other solutions. And I think the DA haven't been radical enough, but I really like the language that's coming out of the DA in terms of Jordan Hill Lewis in Cape Town, in terms of the sort of things that Helen and John are starting to say. And I think we're going to see a much more radical DA than we have, and I think these election results have been very good to give them enough to keep them in the game, but just to motivate them to keep heading in the right direction, because we're heading for a constitutional crisis. More than that, we have to head to a constitutional crisis, and the DA is a constitutional party, and their first instinct is to default to the constitution. And I don't want to be unconstitutional, but there's a point in time where there's a constitution and there's a constitution. At the end of the day, it's not just about the letter of the constitution; it's also about the spirit of the constitution. And that we can't sit around and just be bullied around by people dictating the letter of the Constitution whilst going completely contrary to the spirit. The people of the Western Cape have also got moral rights and human rights and international norms. And actually, we've got to remind ourselves in this election that 20% of the Western Cape, 20.4%, voted for the ANC. Yeah. 80%, 4 out of 5 people in the Western Cape do not want to be governed by the ANC. And actually, we can't just sit here and take it any longer. The consequences are too big. We have to start fighting back, and actually, we have to take the gloves off to fight back.
No, that's a fair point. And in Cape Town, they got pummeled. They had 24% last time. They're down to 18% now. So the mother city clearly doesn't want the ANC. And the EFF, they didn't even register in Cape Town. That's so the DA dropped down to about 60%. But as I predicted, they weren't going to lose control of the city. But that definitely says a very strong message about things. It is interesting what you say, Phil. This is. Now, I should point something out here, because people watching the program may come to the conclusion that I'm bashing the DA, or you're certainly not. You've been objective here. I'm also being objective. I'm looking at what's out there and what I'm saying. But for those who paid attention to the past year and a half of my broadcast and my journalism and my op-eds and things I've written over the past year and a half, I basically told people that you should vote for the party that has the best chance of getting 50+1 and not need a coalition, which puts me in a little bit of dispute with some of the secessionist parties, because they think that the DA needed pressure brought on it. But my point was that to show South Africans who know nothing but ANC rule. I mean, let's bear in mind that over half the country was born after apartheid. They know nothing but ANC rule in most of the country their entire lives. So they don't know what other rule looks like. They don't know what it's like to call your local counselor and they actually answer the phone, or actually see a counselor in your neighborhood checking on street lights or talking to people in neighborhoods about crime, when the only time they see them is election time. So my argument was that 50+1 and go. And what I said all along is that basically that means that in most of the country, you need to be voting for the DA. I wasn't trying to shill for votes for the DA. I was just being honest about South Africa's electoral map. Anyway, so people should, I don't want anyone to infer that there's DA bashing around here, because it's not. I think both of us are speaking objectively about where it's at. Phil has been much more complimentary of where the DA is, and he has, I think, brighter hopes for the DA. I don't necessarily have bright hopes, Phil. That's because I can't get any of these damn people to come on the program. John Steenhuisen's lackeys around him told me he's not interested in coming to my program. I'm sure he didn't get the message. And Helen Zilla promised to come on my program back in May, and I'm still waiting for her to come on. So it's hard to get their views when they won't come on the program. So anyway, but I just want to make sure people were aware that there's no DA bashing going on here. There's no DA promotion going on. I think both of us are being objective about where the situation is. But let me ask you this question. How are things going for your group? Are you still getting a lot of support for the group? I don't know. Do you keep track of membership? Are you growing in members? Are people contacting you about this? Because, of course, we know there's 2 other groups that they're well known for advocating for secession. So how's your group doing? Cape Independence Advocacy Group.
No, good. Look, so interesting. We aren't a group that takes members, so we work with the other groups. So we're not competitors. So you've got the Cape Independence Party, who are a political party. You've got Cape Exit, who are a grassroots organisation. We work very closely with both of them and the Freedom Front on a regular basis. That probably is the 4 that collaborate the most, and we really collaborate on a very, very regular basis. And we in at least weekly communication with each other, sometimes more. And our role is as a lobby group. So we're not really looking for members. In terms of how things are going absolutely fantastic. We go in waves. But I mean, effectively, we're going through these phases. We want to deliver Cape independence. That's the bottom line. And our first task as an organisation when we formed about 2 years ago was to get the media talking about Cape independence, because it didn't. And if you follow the South African media, Cape independence has become a really regular topic, and that's largely due to us, not totally due to us, but I mean we probably write about 50% of the articles, and we published on a very regular basis, and that causes responses and so on. And then we fought very hard to get the referendum on Cape Independence, and actually that now is all but agreed. So that was sort of finalised going into these elections. So that was a huge moment. So now we've got people talking about Cape Independence. We've got a referendum coming on Cape Independence. We've got the referendum legislation before Parliament. All of those things have been huge successes, and now it comes into the next phase. And I think the next phase is, it's probably going to take us. It's probably going to be 18 months before we get to the referendum itself. And in the meantime, what do we have to do? We have to start doing the preparation. Clearly, there have to be a referendum campaign. But in the meantime, we have to make sure that when the referendum's held, that the ANC is going to respect the outcome of the referendum. And that's why all of this movement around the police and all of these things, and creating this coalition in the Western Cape, because we have to start getting the Western Cape to understand that it has the right to dictate its own future. And that's where we must bring together all of these political parties, despite whatever the differences are, and focus on the right, because for the Western Cape people to make choices for themselves, as opposed to the ANC, who've formally said they don't have rights to make choices for themselves. And obviously that politically is really important, whether you want to deliver independence or you're just the DA, you want to deliver police, because if the DA has a referendum tomorrow on control of the police, it'll win it hands down. But it'll take the results to the ANC, and the ALC will tell it to bugger off. So actually they've still got the same issue we have. We have to build this political force on the ground that says to the ANC, there's no way you are going to tell us that we are not going to control our own police force. At the end of the day, if the people of the Western Cape vote to say we want to control our own police force, then you are not going to stop us controlling our own police force. That is our right. And it may not be written in the Constitution, but it's a moral right, it's a political right, it's logical, it doesn't cost you anything. Otherwise, we end up being a colony of South Africa. We have a government that we didn't vote for, imposing its will upon us against our will, and extracting taxes from us. I mean, it just becomes a colony. So that's really critical. So that's the big thing for the next year, whilst this referendum thing is loaning. And obviously, the great thing about that is that will develop a real camaraderie amongst the Western Cape people, because what we're going to see on the other side is we're going to see the true racist nature of the ANC and the EFF coming out, because the other side of that is you are not going to make decisions about the Western Cape. But why? It's not a democracy. If the people of the Western Cape vote for it, we are wanting a referendum based on the democratic will of the Western Cape people. So we have democracy on our side. Their true motives are hidden, but they won't remain hidden. Their true motives are racist. At the end of the day, it's race. It's African nationalism. That's why they don't want the Western Cape.
Racial supremacy. That's what's on the table. Yep. Yep.
It's majoritarianism, and it's kind of like, it doesn't matter. We may be based in Victoria, but actually, this is our country, and it's not your country. It doesn't matter, and that's going to come out, and that's going to create this ideological divide. Is suddenly going to be on display to the world, to the people of South Africa, and people are going to be forced to pick sides, and that is going to be the wave that delivers Cape independence, and it's exciting.
No, it's a great point. I do have a question. There's some confusion about an issue here. My viewers haven't talked about it, but I want to bring it up in just a moment. But folks, you're listening to Chris Wyatt Africa on the Indaba Africa channel, part of the Indaba Broadcasting Network. My special feature guest is none other than one of my early guests from last year. That's Phil Craig from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. By the way, my channel took off like a rocket after he was on my program last year. We don't know if there's any correlation there, but we're hoping with the new channel, maybe we'll get some luck. So we're rubbing that Irish four-leaf clover right here after Ireland beat New Zealand yesterday. But before I get to the question very quickly, Phil, there was a comment here from Com Plumbing and Gas. I guess that's Afrikaan KOM. But he said, so if the Cape secedes, does that mean Western Province Stormers are our national team? The thought of that's disturbing. Easy now. Easy. I'm a Western Province. I'm a VP fan. I have been for decades. You better go easy there. I can block you. No, I'm just kidding. Now, listen, look, it's like this. Sport does this. Who has won the most Currie Cup championships in history? It's been Western Province by a wide margin. They've never won Super Rugby, but we're not in Super Rugby anymore, so let go. They'll win the URC eventually, not this year, but they'll win that United Rugby Championship. So it's a bad time because of Zelt Murray's ineffective, pathetic leadership of the Western Province Rugby Union. That's my comment, no one else's comment. That's my assessment. They let this organization run into the ground, and it's a disaster. That will be fixed. I've made the offer to be the general manager for Western Province, and when the phone rings, I'll come to Cape Town and I'll fix Western Province and the Stormers, and we will get the likes of Peter Steph Dutoit back in Cape Town where he belongs. I don't know if I'm bringing back Sia Khaleesi. I'll think about it, but he's a little long in the tooth. I don't know if I want him. Anyway, so I thought that was important. We addressed that very quickly. And then Patrick says it would be great for the Cape to win the Rugby World Cup, but with the Stormers winning it, no, come on, man. Anyway, and apparently I'm going to lose one of my predictions. I got all my predictions 7 of 8 right this weekend on the international test, but it looks like Fiji is beating Wales. So unless Wales comes back, I'm going to get one wrong. All right, so here's the question that I wanted to ask you, a little confusing. So AfriForum, the civil rights organization, has gone to the Constitutional Court, if I'm not mistaken, and they've asked for them to hear a case and about provinces having the right to put a referendum out there. Apparently, there's dispute about whether a provincial leader can put a referendum out in the province, and you're talking about there's going to be a referendum now. So is there confusion, or has there been a court decision already in that case?
No. So most of those facts are broadly right. They're just kind of a bit jumbled up. So
okay.
So the right to hold a referendum is already in the Constitution. It's in the South African Constitution, Clause 1272F, and the Western Cape is the only province that has its own constitution, and it's also in there 372F. So the right exists, but it says in line with national legislation. And so in other words, the Constitution gives the right, and then there's enabling legislation that says how the right must be enacted.
So the Cape Constitution, does the South African National Constitution include that? I thought that's where it's missing.
Yes, it does.
It does include. Okay,
yeah,
right.
No, it does. Yeah. So in the Constitution, so Constitution is there. The legislation that governs referendums was last updated in 1992, before provinces existed.
Okay.
So the referendum legislation predates provinces, or the current provinces, and only allows the president. So now you've got this disparity between the Constitution and the law. So the law is unconstitutional. So obviously the Constitution is supreme. So therefore the right exists, but the law needs to be updated. And the DA have brought a private member's bill called the Electoral Commission Amendment Act, and that should be before committee stage this month. We amongst other organisations got comment on that, and it was the private member bill with the most ever comments in the South African Parliament in support. It was overwhelmingly in support of the bill, and so we're waiting for that bill to be passed. And once that bill is passed, then the Premier can call the referendum according to the law, although the constitutional right already exists. What AfriForum have said, and they haven't gone to the Constitutional Court, they have said if Parliament doesn't pass that law, they're going to go to the Constitutional Court to force to pass the law because it's already in the Constitution. So effectively, you've got the DA is bringing the carrot, and AfriForum are bringing the stick. But one way or another, we're going to make sure the constitutional right is brought, and the law, which is now unconstitutional, is brought in line with the Constitution. So it's not really a battle that the ANC can win, but they can obviously delay, and there could be shenanigans and so on. And obviously that's why AfriForum are just putting a shot across their bows should they try to do something that's unconstitutional.
Well, that makes a lot clearer. That so it's in the national constitution, it's in the provincial constitution that exists, the only one that has one for province level. It's just that the law predates that constitution. It needs to be updated to match the constitution. Okay, that's why AfriForum brought this case. Well, that's good to get things in synchronized. It actually makes a lot of sense. So interesting. That clarifies a number of things. So that's a done deal then. There's no way the Con Court. I mean, look. So the Constitutional Court, I would say, of late, has given me a lot of confidence in parts of the judiciary. They do remain independent. I mean, when the Independent Electoral Commission, or as I prefer to call them now, the Incontinent Electoral Commission, because they're full of crap. The Incontinent Electoral Commission sought to run the clock out by having Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke come out of retirement to do this report, almost waiting till the very end when they could have done this in January, February, March. They wait. Oh, it's impossible to hold free and fair elections in South Africa. And you know what, Phil? I've told my audience this. I said, when they said that, I said, no, come on, this is ridiculous. There have been 115 countries around the world that had elections. I voted 3 times in election and didn't get the bug. Didn't wear facial covering, used proper sanitation, and I voted no issue. Done and dusted, three elections in the time that this has gone on. And to hear them say they couldn't have a free and fair election, I mean, Somaliland had an election. Nobody even recognized that country. The Central African Republic, a failed state, had an election. Namibia had an election, and SWAPO lost every city. Maybe that's what the problem is. SWAPO lost every city. And then in Zambia, they just had an election election right before this, and the ruling party was balanced on its ear, despite the economists fraudulently claiming that it would be an unfair election. There's no way that Lungo would leave. Well, he did. So I was wrong, though, Phil, and I rarely admit this on my program, but I was wrong. In fact, the Independent Electoral Commission was correct. It is impossible to hold a free and fair election in South Africa if the Independent Electoral Commission is in charge of it.
Well, and coming back to your comment on the Constitutional Court, I don't know if you've ever had him on, but somebody you should have on your show is Professor Chris Wyatt from the University of Pretoria, the Professor of Public. I'll send you his details afterwards.
Please do.
Now, interestingly enough, he says that in the Constitutional Court, it's still possible of South Africa. It's still possible to get a procedurally fair judgment, but it's no longer possible to get an ideologically fair judgment because the Constitutional Court is being ideologically compromised and effectively is pursuing the national democratic revolution alongside with the national government. So if you want to go and take a judgment on a transformation, for argument's sake, then you've got no chance of winning your case at the end of the day because the composition of the Constitutional Court reflects the composition of the government, who's largely been responsible for appointing it, and you're not going to get an ideologically fair judgment. But actually, if you go over a point in law, like we're talking about with the Referendums Act, then you will get a fair judgment.
That's a good point. You know, I found it fascinating last year that the North Gauteng High Court in Gauteng, obviously, they determined that the Tourism Relief Fund was constitutional. But they when it discriminated against people on the basis of their skin pigmentation, that's kind of the definition of racism. But they also, before that, determined that almost every action that the National Coronavirus Command Council dictated was unconstitutional. So I was excited when I heard that, but then they came back and said that you could discriminate against people based on race because of the transformation. So, I mean, that's all over the place. I don't think that's been appealed up to the Supreme Court of Appeal or to the Con Court, but it's kind of uneven. But of late, we saw a number of decisions were made. For instance, we saw the Con Court upheld the Supreme Court of Appeal decision about the taking of Afrikaans out as a medium of instruction at was it University of
UNISA.
Yeah, it was UNISA. That's right. Yeah, UNISA. Yeah. So that's they've upheld that ruling, which of course upsets Blade Nzimande to no end, and I'm happy about that. Anytime a communist is sweating in his boots, I'm happy about it. But so the court, I mean, that's on a principle thing though, not an individual basis. So yeah, I think that's a fair statement. No, I'm happy to get him on. I've had Mark Oppenheimer on the program several times. We've talked about constitutional issues. In fact, I had him on just before he appeared before the court about this election. So it was interesting because it was limited about what he can say because there was no decision yet. And then I had him back on afterwards. So pretty interesting stuff. But again, you seem pretty upbeat about what's going on. We're looking at a timeline about 18 months now for a referendum. Do you think it's going to happen?
Well, it's a guesstimate because what we don't know is what the ANC are going to do in Parliament. So that's the great unknown. Look, we know the ANC is going to fight Cape independence. What we don't know is where they're going to choose to make their stand. So, do they make their stand at this act as it goes through Parliament? Or do they say, look, it doesn't matter, we can't fight this because in the Constitution we'll make our fight at the referendum itself? Or actually, are we going to let them have the referendum and hold our fight afterwards and say, well, it doesn't matter, you've had your say, but referendums are non-binding, and so we don't know what's going to happen. So that's the unknown. Obviously, if the ANC start bringing shenanigans and trying to sort of change this law, and then the AfriForum forced to go to the Constitutional Court, then obviously it's going to take a lot longer than 18 months, and we're probably talking 3 years. If this goes through Parliament, I mean, the DA ironically are very upbeat about this. I've spoken to several people in the DA who are intimately involved with this act, and they all feel that it's going to go through very quickly. They feel that actually it's politically impossible for the ANC to resist this, particularly given the how clear cut it is in the Constitution, so therefore there's no interpretation issues, and the number of public comments which were so overwhelmingly in support, and it was such an extraordinary level of support that it would be really difficult for the ANC to resist it. So look, I hope that's the case. I don't have any experience to know, but on that basis, that's where we're thinking about 18 months.
No, that makes all the sense in the world. I just happened to glance over while you're explaining that, and Vutsarko, who's in South Africa, said the commentators in this rugby game he's watching the Fiji Wales game. He said they were had a lot of praise for Fiji. Now as a South African, now as you've become a South African and no longer look at yourself as English, so this won't hurt your feelings. But he said they're full of praise for Fiji until they started winning. The English are so condescending sometimes.
Listen, I like all of these people. I don't know if you've come across the expression of a soti.
Yes, I have. Yes, that's what they like to call it in South Africa. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's because they've got one foot in either thing. So look, I was born British and I still have family there. And ironically, the one thing I've never done is, so when South Africa play England next week, I'll be cheering for England. I cheer for the Boks for everybody. So I was cheering yesterday for the Boks against Scotland. I'm an avid Boks supporter, except when they play England. So in terms of that's my one vice, the one part of the old country I've kept with me.
Well, that's fair enough. But it was great to see this weekend in recognition, because today, of course, is Remembrance Sunday in the United Kingdom. It's the day because they don't use it on the 11th of November. They use it the Sunday that comes after that. So today's Remembrance Day. It was great to see players in the United Kingdom and in Ireland wearing poppies on their jerseys. In fact, Fiji, I glanced over earlier. Fiji and Wales both have the poppies. Wales has on the sleeve. Fiji has on the top. Of course, Fiji part of the Commonwealth as well at one point, I think. But no, it's people forget. It's over a century now since the Great War, the war to end all wars, which didn't end all wars. That was a silly idea. It's so it's been an interesting weekend with the rugby and people recognizing that. I don't know. Now, I know a lot of South Africans recognize Remembrance Day. Is that something that's important to you, you and your family? Is it something you pay attention to? I mean, you grew up in the UK. I know it's a big deal there.
Yeah, look. So an interesting one. Look, I'm a person that's proud. So I'm proudly British and I'm proudly South African. I love both of my countries, and that's fun. It isn't a big thing here. Certainly, in the UK it is absolutely something that I would honour. One of the slightly bizarre things is obviously if you're particularly someone like me who's quite vocal on politics, I get a fair bit of flack and at various times people infer what your ancestors did, and my grandfather actually was a conscientious objector who was sentenced to death for refusing to fight in the First World War. He was eventually reprieved and spent the war in prison. But he definitely was he was willing to go to his death to not kill another man. So on that I'm fairly clear, but that doesn't stop me having huge respect for the people who gave so much for the sort of free world that we live in now. I have my utter admiration.
The once free world, maybe a couple years ago, and not so much anymore. The Australian penal colony is pretty scary these days. But Kevin Morris just said that I'm some sort of Sudi with a foot in America and in Africa. Ouch. Ouch. Anyway, well, listen, Phil, it's been a pleasure having you back on. I'm not rushing you off, but I think we've covered all the stuff we want to really talk about today. So we've covered the election results, the impact of that, the performance of parties like the Cape Colored Congress, the Freedom Front Plus, and the impact that's going to have with the DA being whittled back a bit and now getting a bit of pressure to go forward with what they promised to do. We've also talked about where the Constitution is on this issue of Cape secession, and excuse me just a second. And even got a little bit of rugby in here, which wasn't the intent. So, but anyway, any last thoughts or comments you'd like to leave people with? Because, like I said, you seem very hopeful about things, and that's excellent to hear. I'm not despondent. I'm not slicing my wrist, but I am incredibly disappointed in the election, in the performance of a number of parties, but and a number of South Africans in general. But you are quite upbeat about this, so I'd much rather get your closing thoughts on this.
Yeah, look, to be honest, things always had to get worse before they got better. At the end of the day, that's the irony. One of the biggest dangers of Cape, or for us, or obstacles, I should say, for Cape independence is in the Cape. We're slightly isolated from the rest of South Africa. Things aren't that bad for us. We clearly we've got a crime issue, particularly in the Cape Flats, which absolutely has to be resolved. and therefore I should respect the terrible things that people have to face in there. But I mean, broadly, we've got hospitals that are functional, we've got schools that are broadly functional, we've got we don't have the same issues with as many potholes and so on as things. So we're slightly isolated, and we don't quite know. We get a gist of it by all of these people that are semigrating and coming in. But I mean, the up part beat is I've always been always been somebody who believes you make your own destiny. Obviously in the scheme of greater powers and so on. And I always love that quote. Winston Churchill. It's probably my favourite quote, and sums up really how we feel about Cape Independence, which is history shall be kind to me, for I intend to write it. So we don't feel like we're passengers in this process. We feel that we actually we to a certain extent we have control of our own destiny here, and we've got a solution, and people should be hopeful and just get behind. If Cape Independence isn't your solution, that's fine, but get behind something. That's my thing. And from our point of view, we've got our hands on the wheel. Things are going exactly the way that we want. We wrote a strategy about 2 years ago. We call it the Cape Moses effect, because actually we just feel like, whether it's divine intervention or whatever, it just feels like the sea, the waves just keep parting in front of us, and we march forward. And the same with this referendum, and we just going ever onward and ever forward, and things are looking really rosy for Cape Independence. And I would, people must, if they like the idea, get behind it and believe it's possible. We can make this happen as a collective people of the Western Cape.
Well, let me know, Phil, when we get to that stage, if the new Cape Republic is looking for a defense minister, because I might be available. I'm just saying. Anyway, but seriously, no, thanks a lot. It's nice to end on a hopeful note. I appreciate that so much, because so much of the news that we discuss from day to day is really sad and depressing, particularly across the continent of Africa, which I cover. Yeah. So it's great to hear somebody that's hopeful about things, and also a more hopeful analysis of the election, which is legitimate analysis. So maybe I'll smile a little bit as the day goes on today, thinking about our conversation. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Phil. It's great having you back on the program. We'll get you back on sometime soon. Discuss whatever's on the table. Okay.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. Nice to be with you again.
Cheers. All right, folks. That's Phil Craig from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. I'll let him drop off on his own there, and then I'll wrap up this stream. So there he goes. Once again, my thanks to my special feature guest, Phil Craig. It was fantastic having him back on the program. He was one of my early guests last year in May. Now, I started doing live streams in April, and he was on in May, and people really wanted me to get him on. I could see why. He's an interesting fellow. But for the flying monkeys in the Twitter sphere, let me just be very clear. That was Phil. This is me. Phil has blonde hair. I have brown hair. Well, now it looks black because of the gray, but it was actually blonde. Or not blonde, it was brown, excuse me. And so I have this lovely Pete Retief beard, and he does not. So if you're confused about who Phil Craig is and who Chris Wyatt is, you shouldn't be now. For those who don't know, the flying monkeys in the Twitter sphere last year attacked my channel and accused me of all kinds of things when they were actually trying to attack Phil, and they got the things they said about him incorrect. And of course, they attributed my image to him by putting a video up when I was introducing him as a guest. But anyway, so thanks a lot to Phil. Appreciate coming on and sharing that. I think we're all a bit better informed about a few things, particularly about the referendum, where it stands, why AfriForum has a court case that's going before the Constitutional Court, and so on. So yeah, Cedric Stevens says the finals 38-23. I think that messed up my spread, but it makes me a perfect for the weekend as far as my games being called. So let me take a look and see here. Yeah, it looked like Wales came back at the end there and really sorted things out there. So let me get back to Super Brew and let me get to my results here. So I had picked Wales by 10 and they went and screwed it up. So I didn't, what? This still says live. That's not live. What the heck's going on here? This is out of date here. So anyway, I won that game. So they won. If they had won 31-23, I'd have been okay. But they went ahead and scored another try and ruined my spread. Otherwise, I would have gotten 2 points there. But I did pick all my games this weekend correctly. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that included the upset that I picked Ireland over New Zealand. So pretty cool. Anyway, folks, thanks a lot for tuning in. I do appreciate your support for the channel. Be sure to smash the like button. It's the only charge we have here. Brett, thank you for the 2 super chats earlier. No new members. That's okay. And I'll debate about whether to do a night owls tonight. I'm going to take a break right now. I've been up since about 5 again this morning. Thank you all so much. And I do appreciate you being here with us. All sense is the word. Why do you keep saying Hemfo for Hendo? You mistyping it? You got some typing issues there. Anyway, yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, everybody. Appreciate your support. Yeah. So at the Principality Stadium there in Wales, it's Wales over Fiji. There you go. So we'll see what happens next week. Australia win by 8 wickets. Jake Dupuis is coming in with the cricket. I think most of us quit watching the cricket or paying attention to it when Quentin de Kock and the Proteas and all their nonsense, and then Namibia, who I was actually excited for, got bounced out. That's it, folks. Cheers and take care. Thanks for the update, though, Jakes, for sharing that. Appreciate it. Fiji played for about 60 minutes with 14 players. Wow. I don't know why they got a red card. I'll check into it. Hey, Ron is in from Bloemfontein. Good to see you there. All right, everybody. Take care of yourselves, and we'll catch you here next time, possibly later today on Night Owls. Not sure. I'll debate about whether to do that. Ronaldo Jos has got Dumadengo on his channel coming up from Mampatria, so you might want to check that out at the top of the hour. Anyway, folks, cheers, and we'll catch you next time. Tony and those Broncos, man. The appeal of Colorado all the way up there in Alberta. I love it.